Equals September 1939. The war had begun, and Private Arthur Mills of the British Expeditionary Force stood on the deck of the SS Amsterdam, the wind snapping at his tunic. Across the Channel, France loomed under a milky dawn, both ally and arena. The soldiers around him joked nervously, their laughter thin as the waves. "Won't be long before we give the Hun what's coming," one said. Arthur smiled, but unease settled in his stomach. When they disembarked at Cherbourg, the French port buzzed with orderlies, horses, and trucks marked with the tricolor. Yet there was no sense of urgency, no fear. It felt wrong, too calm, too expectant. The men marched inland toward Le Mans, where they would be organized before pushing north. The air smelled of damp hay and diesel fuel. Arthur looked east, imagining German panzers rumbling toward Paris, but there was only mist and the faint echo of church bells. War had begun, but the world seemed to hold its breath. The convoy wound its way through Normandy's rolling fields, where the autumn harvest glimmered gold beneath a pale sky. French children waved at the passing trucks, and mothers held up baskets of apples as gifts. Arthur was struck by how ordinary it seemed, this country supposedly braced for invasion. At Arras, the men set up in a temporary billet, an old textile mill that smelled of oil and dust. Officers spoke of coordination with French High Command, of placements along the Maginot Line. Arthur watched maps unfold on wooden tables under the glow of lanterns. "We'll stop them cold," Sergeant Wilkes muttered, tapping a finger on the Rhine. But there was no enemy, no bombs, no movement, just endless drills, trench digging and waiting. Evenings brought the smell of stew and wood smoke, and with it the gnawing question, if this was war, why did it feel so quiet? By late October, Arthur's unit reached the Maginot Line near Sedan. It stretched like a steel and concrete serpent, bristling with turrets, pillboxes, and underground chambers humming with generators. French officers proudly toured them through the bunkers. "Impregnable," one declared, voice echoing off reinforced walls. Arthur traced the cold concrete with his fingers and wondered what it must feel like when shells fell here. The men slept in shared bunks beneath earth and steel, the air thick with diesel smoke and damp. Each night rumors spread of German bombers over Poland, of Soviet movements in the east, but still no attack came. The waiting turned the bravest man's confidence into a quiet dread. Outside, frost began to silver the grass. The line held firm, but against what? No one could say. In the flicker of lantern light, Arthur wrote home, "It's too quiet here, Mother. Almost peaceful. Almost." Equals winter came hard. December snow blanketed the fields, muffling sounds until even footsteps seemed afraid to disturb the silence. Arthur and his comrades built stoves from oil drums, their breath misting in the cold air. Letters from home spoke of rations and blackouts, but to Arthur the war still felt distant, something happening to others. The calm before the storm. Wilkes said one night, staring into the orange glow of a cigarette. Patrols along the frontier saw little but fox tracks and abandoned farmland. The men began to call it the Sitzkrieg, the Sitting War. When Christmas came, they sang quietly around a small fire, exchanging tins of chocolate and cigarettes. Gunfire echoed faintly miles away. Practice, perhaps. Arthur looked toward the horizon where the snow met the dark. "If the enemy ever comes," he whispered, "I hope I remember how to fight." By February 1940, Arthur's section was stationed along the Saar frontier, digging fortifications that faced an enemy invisible but omnipresent. The trenches were wide and dry, their parapets lined with frozen sandbags. "If Jerry's watching, he must think we've all gone mad," muttered Corporal Haynes. Birds darted overhead. Church bells from French villages drifted across the still air. Training kept them busy. Target practice, signal drills, endless maintenance. Rumors arrived faster than bullets, that the French might advance any day, that peace talks were underway, that German armor was gathering beyond the Siegfried Line. Arthur stopped believing any of it. Every dawn looked the same, pale light over an unmoved enemy. He began to fear not dying, but waiting forever. The war, he thought, had become something worse than noise. It had become silence. Equals March brought thawing mud and a surge of homesickness. Letters arrived by the sackful, each one smelling of familiar paper and hope. Arthur read his mother's careful handwriting until the lines blurred. His father had joined the Home Guard. His sister was knitting socks for our boys in France. Around him, men laughed, shared photographs, or stared silently into memories. "When they finally move, we'll crush them," Private Dodd said, though his voice lacked force. French farmers brought fresh milk to the camp. Their stoicism mirrored the soldiers' exhaustion. Arthur began to find comfort in routine, polishing his rifle, checking watchposts, reading by candlelight. Yet every quiet evening deepened his fear that this stillness was only a cruel prelude. "The guns will come," he wrote, "and when they do, we'll wish for this peace again." April 1940 shook the long quiet with whispers that grew louder each day. Germany had moved into Norway. Denmark had fallen in a day. Arthur's regiment gathered around a battered radio, hearing the clipped voice of the BBC confirming the news. "If they can take Norway, what stops them here?" asked Haynes. The officers answered with confidence. The Maginot Line would hold, and the BEF stood ready. But in Arthur's chest the unease grew. Supply convoys rumbled all might. Planes crossed the sky in distant formation. The rhythm of waiting shifted. Now every sound felt like an omen. Somewhere to the northeast, artillery thundered faintly, carried by the wind. "It's begun," Wilkes muttered, his breath steaming in the cold air. The Phoney War, at last, began to crack. May dawned with a strange brightness. Air raid sirens wailed for the first time in months, cutting through morning drills. German bombers had struck Belgium. The Blitzkrieg had begun. Orders came rapidly. The BEF must move north to support the Belgian line. The men packed hurriedly, collapsing tents, loading trucks under the roar of engines. "So it's real now," Arthur said, wiping sweat and fear from his brow. The calm France he'd known for months was gone, replaced by motion, urgency, and the bitter scent of fuel. In the sky, contrails clawed the blue as distant battles unfolded. For the first time, the men saw the war for what it was: fast, merciless, unstoppable. When night fell, Arthur lay awake in the troop truck, the road quaking beneath them. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "The silence is over." Equals. They reached the outskirts of Louvain, in Belgium, as distant artillery lit the horizon. Fields once golden were charred black. Refugees streamed past, clutching children and suitcases. "Keep moving!" shouted an officer. The soldiers scrambled into defensive positions, hearts pounding. The roar of engines grew closer, armored columns advancing in perfect coordination. Arthur sighted through his rifle, his hands trembling. The first exchange of fire shattered months of tension. Smoke and thunder filled the air. He saw flashes, steel glinting, trees splintering, and realized how fleeting peace had been. Hours turned into chaos and exhaustion. When night came, the enemy was still pressing. Arthur's ears rang with ringing steel and cries. The Phoney War was dead. The real one had taken its place. Arthur crouched behind a shattered farmhouse, dawn creeping through smoke. The stillness between bursts of gunfire felt heavier than ever. Around him lay the wreckage of all the long, patient months, maps scattered, helmets glinting in dew. Somewhere, Sergeant Wilkes was shouting orders, rallying what remained of their platoon. Yet Arthur felt oddly calm. The waiting was over. The future had arrived, burning and deafening. He thought of snow, laughter, letters from home, and the quiet before the storm. "We waited for this," he murmured, "and now it's here." As the sun broke through the haze, the first tanks of the German advance rolled into view. Arthur tightened his grip on his rifle, heart steady at last. The world had woken from its silence, and nothing would ever be quiet again.